please won't you be my neighbor?
Life in the hood, right? Neighbors you get along with, neighbors you don't. Neighbors who can remember your name, neighbors that can't. Crisis in the neighborhood. Someone passes away. Someone has way too many children. Yep. Just the neighborhood, right? These last 4 or 5 weeks we've been talking about neighborhood, but through a particular lens. There's this passage of Scripture, a quote really, that Jesus gives us. He repeats it a number of times, takes it from the Old Testament, where he says this, he says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And we've been thinking about that a little bit. What does that look like? How do we do that? Last week we looked at how do you love your neighbor culture as a whole when the values are often so different from maybe the values of a follower of Jesus. Do you just remove yourself from it? Do you try to take it over? What do you do in times like that? And maybe Jesus has a third way, which we looked at, which was to be a humble, faithful presence within the community as a whole. A couple of weeks ago, we looked at maybe Jesus' most famous neighbor story that he tells, a parable, where a Samaritan gentleman comes across a Jewish person who's been mugged and left for dead on the side of the road. You know the story, called the Good Samaritan. And through it, we learned that our neighbors aren't only those people that we live beside, go to school with, work next to, or go to the gym together with. Neighbors are actually created by serving people. They become our neighbor when we do that kind of thing. The last several months, probably 2-3 months ago, we decided there would be a real practical way that we could be that kind of good Samaritan. And so we decided there's a group of people that live just to the south of us in a country that has got some poverty here and there. And one of the places where that's very real is in Puerto Penasco, Rocky Point. And there are a number of organizations from our community that go there to help build houses for people that don't have houses. And that's hard for us to imagine, that you actually don't have shelter. We see people who live on the street and so on here, but there's a good part of the population that don't have homes. And so one of the things that we thought we could do would be to go and build a home. In a way, be God's answer to prayer for them. And so a group of us signed up, and a team of 19 or so left on Friday morning to go to Rocky Point and to help build a house. And that's what they're doing there this morning. Some of 3 or 4 of our staff are there with them, and we were thrilled to have a couple of people from Axiom, church that we helped start a few years ago. They're part of our group. So there's 19 altogether, and they're doing things like mixing concrete, and they're building walls and putting a scratch coat of stucco on the outside of the wall and trusses and roof. And it's really a very basic structure, but it's home to a family. And that's the reason we would do this, just in a real practical way to love people in Jesus' name. A really interesting thing happens within ourselves when we go and participate in this. Jesus does something within us. Our hope would be this, that this group of people that go down and roll up their sleeves and give a long weekend to love a family, that they would actually confuse us with Jesus. That they would think, if that's what Jesus is like, I might just be interested in discovering more of who he is, or maybe ultimately letting him give direction and guidance to my life and maybe becoming a follower of his. But they're likely to see it, first of all, in our group. And it's interesting, on Friday before they left, I gathered with them and I said, hey, I'm going to share some things with our church family this weekend, a passage of scripture, and I'm going to give you the 2-minute synopsis, I told them, which that might be a very, very pleasing option for you this morning as well. You might like the 2-minute. You're going to get the whole thing, unfortunately. Here's the thing, that as you guys go, I told them, I think how you love one another, not just how you love this family, but how you love one another and how you serve one another, it might actually be just as attractive and just as amazing and unusual to them to see a group of people love each other like you do, as the fact that you're building a home for them. So go love each other. It's an interesting thing sometimes when we think about how Jesus prioritized connecting with people who were disconnected from his Father. He made that his priority. In fact, he says that's why I came to this world, to do that. And sometimes for us, when we say that's our primary responsibility as a church as well, is to prioritize loving people who are disconnected from the Father so that they could see the love of Christ and get reconnected to him. Sometimes people will say, but shouldn't we, we should do evangelism, we should reach to people, we should do that, but shouldn't we really just, prioritize forming a loving, gracious, safe, intimate community here? Shouldn't that be our priority over top of where Jesus places his priority? So I want to talk a little bit about that today and think together with you how exactly Jesus responds to that and what he thinks. Where this sometimes comes up, and I see it maybe more often here than in other places in some of our smaller ministry teams or our life groups, where the life group experience is all about, in some ways, caring for some people, people who by and large maybe know Jesus and walk with him, and to be together as a faith-filled community and to care for one another and to learn together, to have mutual love. And these groups kind of exist for that purpose, right? If you're part of a group, you kind of get a sense of that's what it is. And when the suggestion is made, yes, but be open and in fact invite other people. There are so many that want to be in our groups. Invite other people. There's a natural hesitancy for it because the logic is this: we love each other so much, and if someone who's new to our group, if they come in, we might lose some of our intimacy, some of our warmth of our fellowship, and that's just too big a price. Because shouldn't we experience this kind of community? Isn't this important? Yeah, it is. It really is important. And so sometimes the question gets asked, wouldn't it just be better if we stay together as a current group or a ministry team and just grow more deeply in love with each other and with Jesus? And it actually makes sense. That's good logic in one sense. In fact, this morning I want to look at a passage of Scripture where Jesus appears to endorse it and appears on the surface to go, yeah, that is a priority. That's essential. That's absolutely a critical thing for you to have a loving, safe community of Jesus followers. So what I'd like to do is take you to that passage and then just pull it apart just a little bit and see if that's exactly what Jesus is saying. So this is taken from John chapter 13, and this is what the words are, beginning in verse 34 and 35. It says, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." In other words, Jesus appears to be saying, pay close attention to the way that you love your neighbors, the neighbors that are fellow Jesus followers with you. Pay close attention to that. People who share a common faith in him. That might be your family, it might be a small circle of friends, could be a campus ministry, a serving group here at Copper Hills, life group, maybe the church family as a whole. That's any group that would identify themselves as followers of Jesus Christ and make him the center of why they gather and why they're together. And he would say, love them like Jesus loves you. Now, how do I know that's the group that he's talking to? Well, because of what happens in the verses just prior to this. It's really clear that Jesus is talking to his 12 buddies, the gang of 12 that he grew up to be leaders alongside him. And we know through the course of actually 5 chapters, this is from John 13 to 17, that Jesus is meeting with those 12 guys. It becomes 11 at one point because someone leaves, but he's gathered with them. And you know the story. The Thursday before the Friday that he dies, he has dinner with them. And that's really where chapter 13 starts. And then the next 5 chapters are all about the conversation that he has together with them. And it's a fascinating conversation. So we're kind of at the front end of that conversation. They've had dinner together. And there's been the whole foot washing thing. Remember that part of the story? And then at some point we read in John 13:31, as soon as Judas left the room. Okay, you know Judas, right? Don't have to go through his story. What's going on here is that it's an explanation for us that prior to this, Jesus tried to help Judas rethink what he was doing. But in the end, Judas plays his cards and decides he's going to be the guy that turns Jesus over to the authorities for a fistful of money. Jesus and him have this uncomfortable interaction. Judas leaves, and then Jesus has something to say to all of his friends. And what has happened when Judas leaves is a clock starts ticking, and Jesus knows the clock is ticking. It's only a matter of time now before Jesus is arrested. He's beaten, he's put on trial, he's tortured, he's condemned to die, and in fact dies this excruciating death on a cross. These are going to be his last moments with these guys. That's what makes this passage so vital and so important. Because when you're down to the last few minutes with someone, and you know some of us in this room are going to have the privilege, and it really is a privilege, I've been there when this happens, toward the end of our life, to still have our thoughts and presence of mind, people gathered around us who we love, who are the closest to us, and we'll have the privilege of saying some things to them that are really deeply meaningful for us. Probably expressions of love, maybe a memory or two from the interaction over the course of life. But those are solemn, sacred moments. And this is one of these moments with Jesus because he knows what is about to happen, and these are his last moments. And when that happens, you don't talk about the weather, you don't talk about your Thanksgiving plans or the Suns or the Cardinals' inevitable win today or any of that stuff. Actually, you never talk about the Cardinals' win. As a matter of fact, to think about it. So it's this moment with Jesus. He has got some pressing thoughts on his mind, and these are his pressing thoughts. So we'll pick it up from where Judas leaves the room. It says, "The time has come," Jesus is speaking, "for the Son of Man to enter his glory, and God will be glorified because of him. And since God receives glory because of his Son, he will give his own glory to the Son, and he will do so at once. Dear children, I will be with you only a little longer. And as I told the Jewish leaders, you will search for me, but you can't come where I'm going." Did you notice the word repeated 4 times? In most translations, it's actually repeated 5 times. It's the word glory, or a derivative of glory, glorified. It might be 4 times, 5 times. Jesus says that glory is a part of what is going on here. Before he ever gets to the loving part, he talks about the glory part. Jesus has just told his friends, and by extension us, that the purpose of his coming to planet Earth has something to do with the idea of glory. Now, us modern folks, we don't get glory very well. That's a tough idea for us in some ways. If Jesus had said, "I came to love the world," we would get that. Or "I came to express my power in this world," we would get this. But what in all the world does he mean that he has come to express glory, or this is about glory? What do we do with that? Well, glory means a couple of things. It's from the Greek word doxa, and it means two ideas behind it. The first would be glory means to have great worth or value, something of great worth or value, something that's weighty or size or large or grand. So, for example, if you were to put the Grand Canyon next to Skunk Creek, which one has glory? Do I need to show you pictures? It's the Grand Canyon. It's amazing. It's not just a slice in the earth. It's amazing. Have you been there? It's amazing. It's glorious. It's massive. It's big. It's beyond comprehension. Even if you see it, it's hard to imagine. It's 12 miles across this slice in the earth. It's just amazing, isn't it? Well, Jesus is trying to say that what's about to happen is an event that's going to show how great and how good and magnificent God is. There's a second element to it. Glory typically refers as well to radiant beauty. There's a story in the Old Testament, and I think Paul recites it again in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, I think it is, where he talks about Moses going up to the top of a mountain to hang out with God. Like they're there together for 40 days, 40 nights, right? And he comes down with some tablets of stone. You know the story, right? Well, also, when he comes down, we're told that there was some radiance about him because he had been in the presence of God. There's something physiologically different about him. Whatever it was, people identified it as, wow, that's glorious. That somehow there's something about you that's changed by being in the presence of God. That's kind of a radiant beauty, which is also what glory means. So what Jesus is saying is that something is about to happen that is the culmination of the greatest expression of glory that's ever happened on the face of the earth. Buckle up, hold on. You've never seen glory like this before. God is going to be made to look so good, so beautiful, so great, so magnificent, so radiant in glory. And it's actually going to be me that does it, Jesus says, because I am God here on earth. Just buckle up and hold on. It is going to be amazing. When I think of this, there's imagery from Lord of the Rings that comes to my mind. Yay, Lord of the Rings, right? Yeah. Third episode, the return of the king. Aragorn is now the king of the United Kingdom, and it's the coronation of the king. It is a glorious event. Take a look at this and see if you can't capture some of the glory. Glory, right? The nation is thrilled and excited because they have a king. He's been crowned. He brings hope and he brings unity. He's got great power and great authority, and he's a good person inside and out. And the whole kingdom shouts and cheers because of this great expression of glory. And this is what Jesus says is about to happen. Even greater than that, there is glory like you've never seen going to happen before. And this is how it's going to happen. Wait for it. It's a cross. It's not a crown. It's a cross. This was so hard for his friends to get because they expected something different. They really did. And the reason it's so hard to think about for them and maybe for us in some way, because the cross is a place of ultimate ignominy. It's humiliation. It's embarrassment. It's disgrace. It's being publicly stripped naked, beaten, and whipped for criminal acts, convicted of criminal acts. It's being jeered and it's being spit on. It's being nailed to a wooden cross. Radiant beauty, right? Radiant beauty. Revealed worth and value. No, hardly. See, if you and I had been there that afternoon, even if we didn't care for Jesus and thought he was who he was, we would have been horrified at the physical sight. Some of us would have gotten sick. We would have been repulsed. We might have thrown up. Some of us might have fainted. We would have turned away in horror. For sure, we would have shielded the eyes of the kids because nobody should see that. Revealed beauty. Revealed worth and value. Power and greatness. Worth and honor, no. He was impotent. He was weak. And he was broken. And that's exactly the glory Jesus was talking about. Something that doesn't look much like glory. You see, he had just told his friends that they were about to see the greatest expression ever of greatness, worth, and radiant beauty. And what do they get? I mean, wow. How could that have gone so bad? Jesus, how did you let that get away from you? Because that's not what this was supposed to be. This could not possibly have been what Jesus meant, unless it was exactly what he meant. How do you deal with that? How do you think that through? How did they think that through? Well, one of the things is, I guess you could just use some logic. You see, Jesus could have come along and he could have stood on an apple box in the community and raised his arms and said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am full of love and I have grace beyond measure. Forgiveness comes from me, compassion, mercy, goodness, and kindness are mine for you. Vote for me." Or he could show us what that is. Not just talk about it. Show us what that is. See, it's one thing for God to say, "I love you," but it's an entirely different thing to see God being willing to enter into the human race and die on a cross. To show it. It's one thing to say that God is holy and he's just. And then to see the cross and to see that it reveals that he could not just shrug off sin, but bears it himself. Rather from glory going, that's okay, everyone. No problem. A little sully to my holiness, that's all right. I can deal with that. No. He's too great. He's too holy. He's too perfect. And then he takes it upon himself. Amazing. Forgiveness is a great building block concept, but when we see the price the forgiver is willing to pay for the forgivee, it is so much different than saying, "I forgive you." It's different. And this is what the cross says. That's why it's glorious. That's why it's amazing. That's why it's beauty. That's why it's value and worth. And Jesus says the greatest expression of glory. You're about to see it, guys. It isn't my coronation. It's my crucifixion. It's glorious. I guess another way you could think through it or feel through it, maybe it's through our heart. And this is a little harder to talk about and explain, but let me try this way. The ultimate love story is one in which someone gives up his or herself to save or redeem someone else's beauty and worth. The ultimate expression of power is to have so much power that you have the power to give it up to empower someone else. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. Actually, today is Veterans Day. We're going to celebrate it tomorrow. Today is Veterans Day. It originally was known as Armistice Day. Did you know that? Did you know that most of the Western world celebrates Veterans Day? They just don't call it that. They call it Memorial Day, or they call it Armistice Day. It really marks the end of major military operations at the end of World War I. And on the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month, which was 24 minutes ago, interesting, 100 years ago, major operations were done and this peace treaty was declared and World War I was over. We celebrate our veterans who have served because our freedom rests on the shoulders of these brave women and men and their families. But you know something? The greatest glory for a soldier is not to win the battle and to come home victorious. That is glorious. It really is. It's wonderful, and it rightfully brings glory and great honor. But the greatest glory is reserved for those who volunteer to stand in the middle of a fierce battle with overwhelming odds against them, facing danger and death face first, and to have the courage and love for their fellow citizens and say, "Over my dead body, I will protect you and I will stand in the breach for you at all costs. I will save you, and if I die, I want you to know you're worth dying for. If I die, I die." That is the greatest glory that any soldier can have. What a cost it comes back to. Nothing is more glorious than self-sacrificing death for someone else. And our faith, there's no faith that comes even close to what we believe. Doesn't even purport to believe what we would believe. Think it's ridiculous what we believe. That God came into this world out of his great love for you and me and put himself against all odds in the middle of the greatest danger. And he gave up his life on a rugged cross for you and me. And here's the thing. If this is just a story of courage, if it's just a love story that plays out in a book or a movie or a TV screen, but doesn't actually go into our lives and we personalize it, it has about as much effect as a movie or a good book. It sticks around while the emotion is hot, and we can recite it to other people as a great story, but it's meant to do more than that. It's so glorious. It's meant to be transformative to us, to change how we think and how we live. We're meant to walk away from the cross shaking our heads in disbelief that this could actually happen. And when it has that effect on us, we begin to live in a reality of what this vertical relationship with God really is and what it really cost. And then, interestingly enough, the horizontal relationship with our neighbors, people we live with and around, people we don't even like, begins to be shaped and molded and changed. It's because of the glory of the cross. It's because the glory of Jesus. Never before in the face of this planet has that kind of glory ever been revealed. And this is what Jesus says. Guys, before we get to the love part, can I tell you where the love comes from? It comes from understanding this vertical relationship, and you won't be able to stop the flood, the torrent of love for people around you, including people within the family of God and those who are disconnected from God. So he goes on. Now let's get to the love part. So now I'm giving you a new commandment because of that. So that's what so means. Love each other. Okay, that's not a new commandment. It's not. That's Old Testament, that's New Testament, that's all over the place. Here's what's different. Love each other just as I have loved you. Nobody had said that before. You should love each other. In other words, the degree to which you see personally how I have loved you is the degree to which you will be able to love others. If you see the cross as a trinket to wear around your neck, a tattoo on your body, a cool symbol of your Christian faith that you hang on your wall or the mirror of your car, or a token that says, "I'm going to heaven when I die," then it is very little power to create love for anybody else other than yourself. But if you increasingly look at the cross and consider how unlikely it was and the stunning implications because it was, then you'll increasingly love others like you have been loved by Jesus. That's the story of Jesus. But he doesn't finish there. Look what he says. Verse 36, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. That's not what I expected to read. You know what I expected to read? Because of his great love for people who are disconnected from God, I expected to read your love for people who are disconnected to God will prove to those who are disconnected to God that you're my disciples. Why does he start with, no, your love for one another, people who already know Jesus, who are walking with Jesus, who have faith in him, your love for them. How does that prove to people who don't that you're really a legit follower of Jesus? How does that work? It's just amazing to think about it. Jesus is saying, I'm going to the cross, and that will be my greatest moment of glory ever. And the way people who are doubters, skeptics, explorers will see this is more than a good story or a declaration is by how those of you who have encountered the cross personally love each other. Yeah, that's what it says. What Jesus is saying is the effectiveness and potency of a living example of your love for your neighbors is directly related to the health and love this community has for each other. I don't know if you'll know the name Francis Schaeffer, terrific writer, theologian from the last century, prolific writer. One of his best books is really more a pamphlet than a book. It's called The Mark of a Christian. And he looks at this particular passage and he says, what Jesus has just given us is the final apologetic for the Christian faith. What's he mean? Well, we say apologetic, we think like apology. It's not apology. It's making a case. It's Jesus' final case for the veracity and truthfulness of the Christian faith. It's where he puts his marbles right here. This is his final argument for it. And Schaeffer would go on to say this bristling comment. He says, if this isn't happening, it will be the church's fault because culture has not seen the actual love of Jesus as viable and working. But if the church does love each other as Jesus has loved them, then the culture will have no account for how they love each other. Not interesting. But when the culture around us sees gatherings of people who claim faith in Jesus, who lay down their lives and their stuff and their opinions and their self-needs for one another, it's a remarkable thing. It's unheard of. I'll ask you a question. When our culture and community look around and look at us, what do they think? What do they see? Do they see a group of people who would die for one another? Who would refuse to gossip about one another? Who would refuse to triangle in conversation? Who would, when somebody offends, would go, that's okay, it's all right. You probably had some reason, didn't matter, it's all right. Don't even have to talk about it. Or if we're going to talk about it, I want you to know up front, you're forgiven. Now we can go ahead and talk about it. People who give up their stuff to help needy people within the church. They don't hold it for themselves. They have meals together. They enjoy one another's company. You would think they actually love each other. This is what Jesus would be pointing to. And when that happens, when the cross has that effect and love happens, this is what happens for our neighbors. They actually get loved by people who feel safe and secure in their love for Jesus because they're part of a community that they know they can fall back on and will support them and care for them and love them however they do, whether they do life right or not. They're in a safe community. When you live your life with that kind of confidence, that kind of surety that you've got backup and you've got a church that loves you, oh, you have authority and you have power and you have confidence to live that life. I had coffee with a guy this last week. I told him what I was going to talk about. And he starts tearing up. He says, I'm telling you about my grandpa. And he just recited wonderful stories of his grandpa, the things that his grandpa had taught him. And they taught him how to go fishing and how to bait a hook properly. And he taught me about Jesus. And then my mom and dad. You know, I've got X number of siblings, comes from a large family. You know, every one of my siblings know and love Jesus. And I just want you to know, like, the family that I've come from. Because they set a great foundation for values and for truth and for Jesus. I have confidence today in ways that I wouldn't. And there's harmony in our home because of what has been passed down. Similarly, if you come from a family that's been not anything but that, you know the effect that it has on our confidence and our trusting of people and our ability to boldly go out. But when you come, if not from a biological family, but you come from a church family where you know you're loved and you know people know your name and they care about you and they're engaged with you and they always tell you the truth and there's no backbiting and there's not arguing and there's unity and harmony, you have so much more confidence to go and live the life of Jesus away from the gathering. Do you think maybe that's what Jesus is pointing to at this? There's a second thing I think maybe he's thinking about. The love that we have for each other absolutely must rise to a level where it's inexplicable and compelling to our culture. It has to be more than ordinary love. It has to be cross-focused and derived from the cross. The public polling on the potency of the church in America is actually not all that encouraging these days. There's a mass exodus, especially with our children's generation. Could it be that they find not much compelling in the local church? Could it be that they don't see that kind of love within the friendships that their parents have? If you ask these 20s and 30s what it is about the church they're not so fond of, they'll tell you this. Number one, the Bible is the book of the church, but it appears to be not true because it's more learned than it is loved and lived. Second thing they'll tell you, the church is not attractive because it's discompassionate and it's judgmental. But we can change that. You see, where the love of Christ is present because people have really encountered the cross and the glory of the cross, and it's really changed how they think and how they live. It's a place where we humbly serve each other at great cost to ourselves. It's a place where we take care of those among us who hurt and grieve and are sick and they struggle and they're discouraged and they have mental illness and their marriage doesn't look good and they have habits they can't break, but we love one another and we open all of our resources to one another. It's a place where we genuinely celebrate with those we disagree with. It's a place where we don't insist on having our way, but joyfully give our way to someone else. And we do that intentionally. It's a place where we don't insist that we need to be right. It's where we're unoffendable. It's a place that when we hurt or we get angry with each other, we fall over ourselves to make it right. In fact, we take on more responsibility for the problem than we really need to. It's what we do. It's a place where the only words that come out of our mouths are those, or actually from our smart device, if you will, that build people up, especially people who think, vote, and act differently than we do. It's a place where we keep no record of wrong done to us. It's a place where we are ridiculously patient and kind, never jealous or boastful or proud or rude with each other. It's a place where we rejoice when truth wins out and we respond quickly to injustice. It's a place where we never give up on each other, and we are relentlessly loyal. And I want to ask you, where in this world do you find that? The answer better be in our community of faith we call our church family, our life group, our serving place, our ministry, our family. It better be the answer, because this is what Jesus says the cross is about. It's so transformative. It reshapes how we see each other, think of each other, and how we do relationships beyond this. There is nothing like the local church when the local church loves each other like Jesus loved individuals in the local church. This last Friday, a week ago Friday, Alfie and I were doing a little bit of work in our front drive. Our garage door was open and we were doing some stuff out in the driveway. And this car pulls into our neighborhood, into our street. And he was on the opposite side of the street to us. It's like he saw us at the last minute. He swerves over to stop right in front of our driveway, rolls down the window, and he says, "Hey." So I went over to where he's at. I say, "Hey, I just wanted you to know something. I am so glad this church is in our community." I went, "Oh, wow, that's really cool." He says, yeah. He said, I'm an Irish Catholic, a good Irish Catholic, but I don't go to church. I don't believe what you believe. But I want you to know I'm so thankful that this church is in my community. Now, for Alf and me, that's pretty personal because 21 years ago, we spent a summer walking around the community that we were living in. You've heard this before. We knocked on 600 doors and we asked them about their church experience. Way over half of them, way over half, said they didn't go to a church anywhere. And of that, I'm guessing, not scientific, I'm guessing 80% said the reason we don't is because we've had a bad experience and we're not going back again. And then when you ask them why, they would go, well, the church just doesn't make any difference in our community. We wouldn't care if it was here or it wasn't here. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to our community. And I said, there's no way. The church is the body, the expression of Jesus Christ. And Jesus was beautiful and attractive, and he was glorious all the way to the cross, glorious, made a difference in this world like the world's never seen before. And we're invited to be that kind of place. And now when a neighbor pulls in to our street and rolls down the window and said, I'm so glad you are here in this community. You go, Jesus, I think that's what it's meant to be. That's your bride. And this person has seen something in this group where he goes, I'm not part of the group. I'm not sure I'm that interested right now. But I'm interested, and it's so unique, it's unexplainable who you are and how you love one another and the difference you make. And this is the glory of the church? Nope. It's the glory of the cross because it changes and transforms and makes us new and unique. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus, these are your words. And they were important enough to you to recite them a number of times. You plagiarized them from something that had been spoken a couple of thousand years earlier in an Old Testament environment. And there's just a consistency to it. Jesus, would you form us into a community of people who are mistaken for you, who really genuinely love one another, who look after each other, always think the best of each other, don't criticize and complain, condemn one another, but we're really for each other. And we continue to remind one another of the beauty and the wonder of the cross and the glory of that and what you've done. Because Jesus, we really do want to. We want to think more and more like you so that we would be increasingly mistaken for you and the beauty and the glory of who you are. And we'll be grateful if you do that, Jesus. Amen.